31, and again I mentioned about D'Angelo's Brown Sugar at number 25 being influential to me because of neo-soul music, but because of Brown Sugar got released, this album, Urban Hang Suite by Maxwell. In 1996 this album was released. It actually was recorded in 1995. It should have been released before D'Angelo's Brown Sugar, but Columbia Records wasn't too sure if there was a market for it and so forth. So this album is co-written by Stuart Matherman, who had written with Sade, and then also Muse, which is also Maxwell's actual pseudonym name. He also wrote some tracks with Leon Ware, who'd also written tracks with Marvin Gaye he'd written his own album called Musical Massage, but he also co-wrote wrote I Want You album for Marvin Gaye. So Maxwell's working on great people on this album. He's got some really good musicians. I think he's got Pino Palladino on bass, and Urban Hang Suite in fact probably was one of them albums that had some great songs coming from America. The album actually was not cheap in the UK to buy because I think it was considered an import album. It actually got a little bit of credit. People started listening to it. Never really got on radio here in the UK, but probably in London, R&B radio and stuff, Capital and so forth, but not in the rest of the UK. Not so commercial. But Maxwell, as you may know, is a great singer, great melody writer, and Urban Hang Suite has some beautiful music on it. Probably the best stack is Ascensiondonteverwonder, Until the Cops Come Knocking. It's again, like D'Angelo mentioned with Brown Sugar, he's using the influence of old music and mixing it with the new sound of production and so forth. Now, a lot of people may have wondered, is this the first Maxwell album I've written? And actually, if you go back, I think number 13, if I remember correctly, is Embryo. And I love Embryo more because I love the soundscape and all the rest of it. The Urban Hang Suite mainly produced in Electric Ladyland, mainly very much a New York sound, mixing the elements of Quiet Storm, Smooth Soul and so forth. And the concept album was considered a song cycle that focused on an adult romance between Maxwell and a partner. Same as Embryo, but Embryo goes into more spiritual and deeper meanings. Urban Hang Suite wasn't originally a commercial success. I kind of heard about Maxwell due to Vibe magazine. I'd heard about him on MTV, and he was a bit of a slow burner, Maxwell. Probably like D'Angelo, so I kind of thought, well, you know, I heard about 2 songs of his, and I thought, oh, this is quite cool. And I just thought, let me check it out. Remember, this is pre-internet, so it's very different. And though it wasn't a big seller, it eventually did very well in America. Success with critics, praise because it's a departure from the mainstream hip-hop oriented R&B at the time, and a lot of comparisons to Marvin Gaye and Prince, the same as D'Angelo. Along with D'Angelo's Brown Sugar and Erykah Badu's Baduism, this album is probably the commercial exposure to the neo-soul movement. A lot of people do think that with Maxwell, this is his best album, and I would kind of say I understand that, because I think it's the one which was the most impacting, probably the songs which people felt were the best and most commercial. I mean, I love Embryo more. However, you know, Maxwell, from the background, studied very young. I think he was only, when he released this album, he wasn't that old. I think he was only probably mid-20s maybe when he released this album. So, and again, he really had to, it took a lot for him, because I think it was risky, and I think at the time, like I said, I think when he was produced primarily, Maxwell credited himself as Muse, because I think what he had to do is the idea back then, people didn't see R&B singers as producers. It was always like the super producer, and they featured the artist. So Stuart Matherman as well, because he'd worked with Sade, really understood stuff. There's also funk guitarist, so very much recommend from this was Melvin Wawa Watson. He was great because he'd worked with Marvin Gaye, worked with Leon Ware, and that was really influential to this sound. So I would probably say, if you like this, if you like I Want You or Musical Massage by Leon Ware and I Want You by Marvin Gaye, if you want to listen to an up-to-date version of the 90s, that's where urbanhangsuite comes in. With urbanhangsuite, great songs, really interesting. Is the creativity is quite feminine. So though he is a man, it's got this idea of the inspiration between romanticism, being open, being in his feminine energy. With Maxwell, again, very much critics love this album. That's a very different thing to Embrya. And with this, its popularity was huge. And I think probably with Maxwell, it was always kind of, because it was so critically successful, I think that's why Embrya had its issues. And I don't want to talk about it because I mentioned it before. However, with this, just to look into it, is from a thematic point of view, Maxwell with urbanhangsuite and Embrya, the theme and the concept album is very strong. I don't find that so much with the Now album. I felt that was a bit more patchy. And then also the Black Summer's Night, which I like some of the stuff. I just prefer Embrya, and I prefer this album. I think it's just got more something I prefer there. So when we're looking at this, most of the writing, like I say, is by Maxwell or Matherman. The one thing is with it is you've got this kind of thematic issue of this relationship with this woman. The idea of this actual is kind of like the beginnings of a relationship, then going on a date, the worry of that, then being together, very intimate, and then talking about the idea of it working, and then also the idea of it resolves as well in the reunion. So it's got a very circular feel going on to it. The other thing as well with the players on this is there's a lot of musicians who came out of these sessions, became very famous. Amp Fiddler, for example, became very famous, started working with Dilla. Amp Fiddler started doing his own music eventually in the 2000s. Stuart Matherman was then also regarded quite highly outside of working with Sade, because Sade always took so long to write albums. So Maxwell was really good for him because it gave him his channeling to write music. Another thing as well is what people don't realise is with Maxwell, he actually is, though he is mainly seen as a singer, he's actually a great musician. Plays keyboards, plays guitars, does drums as well, does a lot of drum programming, and his arranging is also interesting as well because he obviously comes up with the main melody, and then it's just obviously the other musicianship helps him write these ideas. So and if you actually look at the album cover, you'll see some things that you'll learn that Maxwell does some of the stuff on his own, and then he's got stuff where he's co-written stuff. So and so Maxwell's sound and his ideas was pretty revolutionary at the time because nobody, like I said, R&B singers just didn't have that. And I think with D'Angelo doing well, that really helped. And in the UK with Maxwell, because he did well, that was also set a new scene for some people who wanted to do that stuff. So a guy called Connor Reeves probably was influenced by Maxwell and D'Angelo. There was sort of neo-soul was creeping into the UK, obviously not with all the backing as much, but urbanhangsuite, along with Brown Sugar, probably influenced the neo-soul movement, and it also made people look at artists who wanted to do that music and not just be a singer with backing, with a super producer backing them. And I think it changed the transition of that. And when we look at it now with the bedroom producers and so forth, they are also doing like Frank Ocean stuff. They probably would have listened to Maxwell once they got in the 2000s when they were born, and listened to that stuff and got influenced by it. And then obviously they just change it slightly with the alternative sound, with electronica and so forth. So urbanhangsuite, great album by Maxwell. I prefer Embrya personally because I like the thematic idea of it, but this album is not weak. I think it's should be highly rated. Again, did well commercially, but I think it's sometimes an album which has kind of been left in its era, like Brown Sugar. And I think sometimes people need to listen to it and really listen to this great music and hear what it can teach you in not just arranging but vocal harmonies, ideas, feel, because this is the thing a lot of music I think is lacking, because everything's so programmed, we're missing feel, and then that's where some vocalists all sounds very samey, and I think this is where we need to get back and listen to some of this stuff, not only to the 70s music and that nostalgia, but in the 80s, but also listen to the 90s and hear where people did use electronica, the programming, but did it with the authentic musicianship as well. So, number 31, Maxwell's Urban Hang Suite.